Well, thank you for joining us for the news review. We get into that. We'll be joined shortly by Suleiman Brima, Executive Director for the Center, the Media Foundation for West Africa. I hear he's joined us. A very good morning to you, Suleiman.
Good morning, Ben. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure always having you join the conversation. We'll be delving into the papers shortly, but I'd just like your take, especially as we're going to be narrowing down, focusing a lot this morning on flooding. I'm sure you've seen footage from the central region here on this platform and beyond, and what happened. Some places clearly submerged in Cape Coast, and it is indeed becoming a threat. Personally, people have reached out to me, sharing videos, sharing photos. Very pathetic situation. What is your reaction to that, even as we contemplate the rains that are still with us?
Well, these are troubling developments, and I believe that is traceable to the whole issue of climate change and its effects. Communities that did not expect rains at particular times are expecting rains, and therefore they are largely unprepared for it. In other communities where rains are expected for farming, they are lamenting over no rains. And I think that this is a global phenomenon. We as a country have to do our part, and people have to also be oriented, sensitized, and educated about these developments. But it also points to the need for us to have a proper national planning for mitigating the effects of the climate disaster, and of course also doing whatever it takes to ensure that our country remains resilient for some of these developments. Over the years, I don't think that we've done much. Not too long ago, we were talking about Achimota Forest and how it's being parceled out, and governments that is fully aware of the challenges of climate change and the need to preserve our environment, the need to build robust forest belts and all of that, is the same government that is interested on compassionate grounds, they say, to parcel out acres of land back to families. And then we hear about those who have also benefited and actually put it in their will and all of that. As a country, at a time when we are facing all these climatic challenges and disasters, we are busily committing millions of cedis to building a national cathedral. At a time when these are the matters that confront our livelihoods and our future sustainability, we are investing in other areas that are really areas that you would say wouldn't contribute in any way to the development and future sustainability of our country. And so I think we need to continue to have a national dialogue about these, because these are signals of perhaps worse things to come in the future. And the earlier we deal with them, the better for all of us.
But when you speak of a national dialogue, Suleimana, I mean, what else must be said? We have spoken ad nauseum, ad infinitum about, flooding. We've seen administration in, administration out. What has it really changed? I mean, tell me, in the last 30 years or so, in this democratic dispensation that we have, 1992 to 2022, what has that yielded for us? So what more must we do to get some change? Because I know some areas that are flooded since, time immemorial, since I was old enough to see that this is flooding. And it's still flooding today.
Well, certainly we cannot say that as a country we've been stagnant in terms of progress. We have seen progress in many areas. And of course, our 30-year democracy has had its own upsides. And of course, we have also seen the downsides. I have always lamented the fact that over the years, we've really not had a patriotic leader. Kwame Nkrumah was in power not up to 10 years, or technically speaking, not even up to 8 years. We've had leaders who have been in power, well, let me say presidents, not leaders, who have been in power for 8 years, and yet we haven't seen the impact that people like Nkrumah made, even at a time when development was not as perhaps easier to do than as it is now with technology and so on and so forth. But we cannot also say because there appear to be hesitance on the part of people we elect to be leaders who end up not being leaders, not doing the right things, and for that matter, we also remain quiet. I think we have to keep pushing. Hopefully, one day we would get a president and a government that listens. I think what we have now is a government that completely doesn't listen. If it commits to doing A, whether or not A ends up being in the interest of the people, it is something that they will do, such as we are seeing with the National Cathedral. The Christian community, generally, the general public, the concern is why commit these resources of our country at this time to something like this? And yet, the government is trying to explain away. I was listening to Newsfile on Saturday, and I was really sympathizing with the executive director of the National Cathedral Secretariat, because he was struggling to explain himself. He was struggling to really justify and convince anyone, because even in terms of how much we are committing into the whole project, he was unaware and saying that, well, we would explain in a press conference and so on and so forth. I really don't know why he agreed to be on that program, because certainly it was going to be a difficult thing for him to be able to explain anything to convince anyone.
And now there's even talk about compensating those whose land, whose property had to be, taken down, razed to the ground for the project to start. That's another conversation altogether. We're not even talking about the judges who are now, in other residences, whose monthly bills have to be paid in dollars, as we hear. It's a whole situation, isn't it?
Well, so as I said, we have a government that wouldn't listen to the cry of the people, a government that perhaps has its own agenda, and whether or not those agenda turn out to be good for the people or not, it says that's what we want to do. And that's really unfortunate. But as I said, we cannot say because of that we should keep quiet. We just have to keep talking. We just have to keep sensitizing people, explaining to people our perspectives and our views. And hopefully that is what would eventually contribute to shaping the priorities of the next government, whether it is MPP or NDC. Otherwise, being silent, as they say, no government listens to silence and reacts to silence. Unfortunately, we have a government that doesn't even react to public outcry in terms of what our country needs and the priorities of our country. But we have to keep talking. We have to keep sharing our thoughts and our perspectives. Sometimes we may not also be right. Who knows? And the importance of democracy is to continue to have, debates, dialogues, public exchanges, and all of that. But the climate thing is so critical. And I think those of us in the media, we also do have a role to play in sensitizing people to appreciate the devastating effects of the climate issues and the need to do our part. The president talked the other day about demolishing buildings on waterways. I haven't seen any action to that effect. I just hope that it's not one of those his nice talks and beautiful talks to get the applause, but one that really will be acted upon.
Right.
Otherwise, we are all in for trouble, and perhaps the worst is yet to come.
We've also heard the Speaker of Parliament, complain about the flooding situation and what must be done. But let's get into the papers now. The Daily Graphic. And interestingly, tied to what we're talking about, flooding. Akakpo prison flooded. Suleiman Ibrahim. I'll be getting to that story on page 16. But commercial banks not supporting Agric drive, that's according to the sector minister, Dr. Kotoko. There's also relief for small marginal farmers, $24.98 million Agric assembling plant in the offing. India Exim Bank finances project. That's one we have to keep our eye on. And Ghana is to establish an assembling plant for agricultural equipment. It's to be sited at Esienipong in the Ashanti region. The project will start immediately. This follows a credit agreement signed between the governments of Ghana and India to be financed by the India Exim Bank. It will be executed by the Action Construction Equipment Limited of India. Now, the plant will assemble tractors and backhoe loaders and also undertake the fabrication of agricultural implements. The Minister of Finance, Ken Oforiatta, and the resident representative of the India Exim Bank, G. Selva Kumar, signed for their respective governments. That definitely is a positive, isn't it, Suleimana?
Yeah, it is. I think that anything that is intended to boost agriculture in our country is a positive thing, because Agric really is the backbone of our country. Unfortunately, I think that the current Agric minister has really not delivered, because I think that this government, despite all the challenges with sweet talks and less action, has invested quite considerably in the Agric sector. But we haven't seen that translate into a significant improvement in the Agric sector. Again, that sector has also witnessed a lot of the, nice talks and all of that, jargons and slogans, planting for food and jobs, and how much a bunch of plantain is being sold and so on. And when we were hit, or when we've been hit by the food crisis, then we realized that all those things were just phantom talks. Because if indeed we were doing so well in Agric, we were having this buffer stock company that is doing so well, and food is being preserved and all of that, and we shouldn't be hit by the crisis the way we've been hit in terms of food prices and so on and so forth. Where's the food that we were overproducing in the last couple of years? You can't understand. And so, any investment in the Agric sector is a great one. I grew up in a family that is just about farmers. My dad, my mom never went to school, and we all grew up farming. And to a large extent, I would say my parents are still farmers, even though they no longer have the energy to farm. So I'm really passionate about agriculture. And that is why, as I keep hammering, I think the current Agric minister has been a failure. Because if you look at how much has been invested in Agric over the years, and they talk about planting for food and jobs and so on and so forth, one would have been expecting that our Agric sector would have really, really been a booming one. Today, people are talking about the cost of fertilizer. Yes, fertilizer prices have increased globally, but I don't think that the rate of increment in Ghana is something that is really affordable. I know a number of farmers. Like I said, I grew up in a farming community, and I still maintain the links. You talk to them and they are telling you, this year we are not going to be able to farm, because we don't think that even if we have money to buy the fertilizer, at the end of the day, we'll be able to recoup our investment. Not just the fertilizer, but the other inputs, the chemicals, the weedicides. Some of them have, quadrupled in prices.
Right.
And so it's really unaffordable. But otherwise, Agric remains our backbone.
Let's get into some other stories. Like I mentioned, Akakpo prison flooded. Heavy rains in the central region have wreaked havoc, claiming one life, submerging communities, including the Akakpo camp prison, and cutting off the bridge linking Cape Coast at Twifupraso at Jukwa. That is Cape Coast and Twifupraso at Jukwa. Now, the rain started from last Friday night to Saturday dawn. More than 100 houses in the Komenda Edina Eguafo Ebire municipality, that is the KEEA, were submerged after some rivers overflowed their banks. At Akakpo, a prison officer, senior chief officer Lutrot, drowned when flood waters swept through the camp prison. So you can talk of the damage, Sule, to road infrastructure. You can talk about NADMO's response, which always is lethargic, sad to say, but this is how bad it gets. Where people who have been incarcerated are at the mercy of the vagaries of the weather. And here you have an officer, unfortunately, losing his life. I don't know what else we need before we sort of realize that this has become an epidemic, a pandemic if you like. I mean, we're talking a lot about COVID-19 and monkeypox and all of that. This has been with us forever.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate, and it reflects our lack of long-term planning, our lack of preparedness for the effects of the climate crisis. The other time, it was in the Volta region where communities were being wiped out. Now, in the central region, prisons getting flooded, bridges collapsing, roads being washed away. And it certainly tells us that we need to begin to prepare. And the preparedness is not about nice talks about what we are going to do in the next 6 months or 3 months and so on, but really preparing for the future, preparing for the future generation, preparing our climate resilience measures and all of that. Forest reserves are going. When we were growing, I mean, we used to use big trees as landmarks to give directions to people, and not to talk about the forests that were all over. Today, they are no longer there. Water bodies are being killed because of galamsey and so on and so forth. So we are really living a life as if there is no tomorrow. I mean, I traveled recently to parts of the eastern region, and you look at the color of the water, and you ask yourself, what is this? Do we really have leadership in this country? Must we destroy everything around us because we want to get the money today? And unfortunately, that appears to be what we are in. And the earlier we prepare, the better for us. We have literally been gradually getting out of the crisis of COVID. The last time I heard in Parliament, when the finance minister was being summoned, and he did not appear, I'm told that the finance package that was being considered was again related to COVID, some $70 or $74 million COVID mitigation fund or whatever it is. And I'm wondering, are we still dealing with COVID? It's still about money coming in for people to take advantage of. If anything at all, we should be repackaging
and you
thinking
see,
about.
you would think, Suleimana, along these lines, because there has not been proper accountability. If there had been, you wouldn't be saying what you're saying now. But because we are all not in the know, we don't really know what the facts and figures are. It leaves a lot of people contemplating whether all the sums we've accrued or taken stock of from the Bretton Woods institutions and other places on the back of fighting COVID have been used for purpose.
Well, I think that I given what we know, I really was not expecting anything like accountability with COVID funds. When COVID started and this government decided to provide what was called hot meals or whatever, I realized that, well, the corruption machine has been oiled. I mean, this was a joke to say that we are providing food in packs to people, and eventually we all heard about how much went into that and so on and so forth. So I personally don't expect any proper accountability with COVID funding. COVID really brought in a lot of funding to this economy, and I think that yes, the global effect was massive. Airports had to be shut for a long period of time and all of that. But to a large extent, those effects were compensated by the huge amount of monies that came in from World Bank, from IMF, from other donor agencies, and so on. And the impact of COVID perhaps ought not to have been as significant as it has been on our economy and on our country. It's just that it was an opportunity for people to loot and share and really live a life that was not commensurate with our status as a country. But I mean, I really wonder what is happening. Sometimes I ask myself, doesn't the president of the day want to be proud of a legacy when he leaves power? I sometimes ask myself, does the president really want whoever succeeds him as the leader of the MPP to win the next election? I don't know, because some of the things that are happening is almost like, look, I'm just doing whatever I want to do, damn the consequences,
Yeah.
and it's really unfortunate.
Let's get into the Ghanaian Times newspaper, Suleimana. Destruction in central region, 700 houses. That's how many? 700 houses submerged in downpour. Prisons officer drowns, like we've already mentioned to you. But the statistic about 700 houses, the Ghanaian Times newspaper captures that. There's also injured teacher seeks justice in Islamic SHS shooting. I'll bring you two angles of that conversation. So the first one, an English tutor at the Islamic Senior High School in the Ashanti region, that is Kofi Entry, is seeking justice for what he alleged was police brutality meted out to him in the Islamic SHS and police clash. Now, he currently cannot see, as his head and face have been bandaged as a result of the assault meted out to him in the melee that ensued last Monday, and was battered by crowd control police until he fell and was even denied access to the hospital. Narrating his ordeal to the media as the Defense and Interior Committee of Parliament visited the school on a fact-finding mission on Friday to ascertain what led to the fracas, the tutor, who now works with assistants, said all he set out from home that day to do was teach, yet he ended up, bruised, battered, assaulted. Tied to that, on page 4 of the paper, the Defense and Interior Committee of Parliament wants the Ashanti Regional Director of the Department of Urban Roads of the Ministry of Roads and Highways blamed for his inaction leading to the clash between the students of the Islamic Senior High School and the police. The committee was of the view that, quote, if the department had acted earlier, the fracas which ensued between the students and the police last Monday would have been averted. Sule, over to you.
Well, that was a very, very devastating development. According to the reports, the students had always complained about the lack of speed ramps and the need for speed ramps because students and other people were always being knocked down by cars. Why no one paid attention to the cries and calls of the students for all that period is something that is so surprising. And I think that is why the parliamentary committee is talking about the head of the urban roads in the Ashanti region, because it's something that could have been prevented, but it was allowed to fester until the students decided, look, we cannot continue to lose our colleagues and we need to protest. How they went about it, I'm not too sure about it, whether they really posed any danger with the way they wanted to go about the demonstration or how they started it. But of course, we know that the police overreacted and, as usual, resulted in some of the challenges that occurred. I read whilst I was away that the IGP visited the next day. Certain actions were taken, including the removal of the deputy regional commander who was in charge of the region at the time, and also the removal of the Swami Divisional Police Command. I think the area falls under Swami, possibly. And then the person in charge of operations also. I think that those actions were quite swift. And sometimes that is what is needed to send a clear signal to others that, look, when you are in leadership position, you can be held responsible for your actions or inactions. Right. In this case, perhaps they are inactions. And in the same vein, if the persons in charge of making sure that the demands of the students were met are sanctioned, or at least actions are taken against them, it would again send a strong signal that if you are in charge of roads and other things, look, you have certain responsibilities, and unless you adhere to those responsibilities, you can be sanctioned at some point. We would see some action, but perhaps as you and I are talking, nothing will happen. Maybe this person is a big person. Students have been maybe maimed. A teacher is in trouble. Police officers have been, sanctioned. And yet maybe this is a big person who, despite no action, would face no action. And it is.
It is what it is, I guess. Just to wrap with the Ghanaian Times newspaper, for the sake of time, I had to sneak in the sports as well. RTU thrash Hearts of Oak to survive. Wafa 11 Wonders, Sharks relegated. I don't know what is happening to Hearts of Oak. Over the weekend, interestingly, I got to meet and interact with Nanayao, the CEO of Krobia Kumasi Asante Kotoko, a team I'm very proud of. At the same time, in Accra Hearts of Oak was getting hammered by Real Tamale United. If you remember back in the day when Abedi Pele played there, well, they escaped relegation thanks to the last match they played by thrashing Accra Hearts of Oak. I don't know whether you follow any of the football, but that's just...
Well, I do. Unfortunately, the team that I'm passionate about hasn't always been doing quite well.
Which is?
I really love King Faisal for a number of reasons.
Alaji Bruza is King Faisal.
One, because I love Alaji Bruza. Right. And secondly, when I was in secondary school, in Tepa Secondary School, King Faisal was in the second league. Those days, I think they used to call it second league. And there was a team also in Tepa that played in the second league. And anytime King Faisal was in town, we would always go and, watch the match and all of that. And from that time, I've had that passion for King Faisal. But as I said, also because of how I like Alaji Bruza and the way he talks and all of that. So I've been a fan of King Faisal over the period, but the team really hasn't been doing quite well. Of course, RTU is the giant from the northern sector, and I believe that if local football is anything that the locals in the northern sector of the country would enjoy, the survival and strength of RTU is so critical. And to that extent, I think that is great news that they are doing quite well and are able to trash Hearts of Oak in their own backyard by 3-0 or so. So
4 goals to 1, actually. 4 goals to 1. And King Faisal is currently 14th on the league log out of 18 teams. Quickly, the Daily Guide newspaper, the other stories we appear to have done, but D-Day for NPP chair aspirants, and details on page 3 of that paper. Now, the Finder newspaper. Court of Appeal dismisses ENI Vital's application against High Court ruling on payment plan. President inaugurates completed $217 million phase 2 of UGMC, that is the University of Ghana Medical Center. NHIA to include mental health treatment in NHIS, that's Dr. Okoboy, and crash deaths rise to 1,140 in 5 months. There's some hope because it represents an 8.8% decline from the 1,250 killed last year, and most of the metrics appear to be going down, which is a good thing, but it's still very high. But I would like you to touch on those two. NHIA to include mental health treatment in NHIS. For a long time, some of us and those in the mental health space have said, add it. It is crucial. And especially in these economic times and, the wahala people have to face, I feel it is a great step by the NHIA. And I doff my hat to Dr. Okoboy on that one. Your quick reactions.
Certainly that is great news. We are in a country where I think all the time, mental health hasn't been prioritized. And that perhaps is on the basis that a lot of people, when you talk about mental health, they think, the first thing they think about is, the person who is going mad, or those sitting on the streets, begging, mentally ill people, and so on and so forth. But I think mental health goes beyond that. All of us need it. All of us, the psychotherapy, even getting the opportunity to be talked to by, clinical psychologists from time to time can be really, really helpful. And so it's good that it's added now so that you and I can walk to the hospital and decide to engage a psychologist, people who are feeling depressed, people going through trauma, and so on, would then be able to appreciate the fact that, look, it's not normal. We are sick. We don't have to wait to get malaria or feel temperature or feel pains and so on before we visit the hospital.
Right.
And so it's a positive development, and I, would want to commend Dr. Okoboy for his leadership in that, and making sure that is going to be added. It's really positive.
All right. I want you to reflect on two stories in not more than 2 minutes so we can wrap in the next 2 minutes. The Custodian newspaper, Ghana has best fuel in West Africa. That's according to the MPA. Pictured there, the head of quality assurance, Mr. Said Ubeidala. What he's not telling us, though, while he speaks about quality, is that we have one of the highest prices of fuel on the continent. If you look at our minimum wage, $1.30 something, compare it to South Africa's minimum wage of $11 something, and you are buying a liter of fuel at $1 something, then you realize your entire minimum wage is going into purchasing a liter of fuel. And we have one of the highest, I think first or second in Africa. But tied to that, leave gays alone. MPP chair declares. Same story, that's the Republic Press. Same story in Ghanaian publisher, leave homosexuals to enjoy themselves. Freddie Blay. Your quick thoughts on these two in less than 2 minutes, if you can manage it.
Well, the fuel price issue, I think it's a global thing. And so I really don't blame the government, even though people talk about the number of taxes on the price buildup. For me, it's about how government utilizes our resources and the fact that whatever we are paying ends up going into people's pockets, into people's investments and so on. That for me is what is quite worrying. Other than that, well, it's a global phenomenon. US, everywhere, people are complaining about the price of fuel. In terms of the LGBTQ issue that has come up, I think it's quite a very dicey issue. We need to have a very well-informed conversation and discussions about it.
Right.
Incredibly being the leader of the ruling party, I think how he talks about it is important because at the end of the day, if we are not careful, we would end up either whipping emotions for people to be reactionary towards the whole conversation.
Right.
I think it is one that requires sober conversations for all of us to understand the rights-based approach that we must use in ensuring that, well, people can assert their rights without being abused. And of course, as a country, we are also part of the international community, and we cannot say, look, in terms of human rights, we adopt this, we don't adopt that, and so on. And then we need to also look at the law that is being proposed. Right. Is it one that will have other effects like right to association, right to assembly, and so on and so forth? Otherwise, if we talk the way he is talking, it will be a challenge for all of us.
Suleimana, thank you so much for joining us. Next time, we'll be speaking some French. I spied your French dictionary right next to you. So next time, we'll have a conversation in French. Fair warning. But always
thank you so much. Have a great week.
All right, same to you. Suleimana Ibrahim, Executive Director, Media Foundation for West Africa. And that's how we cap it off. Up next, we have sports with Muftau Nabila Abdullahi. Stay.